Obrigado.
Now I give the floor to those members of the council who wish to make statements after the vote. I give the floor to the permanent representative of the United States.
Thank you, Mr. President. The United States is deeply disappointed that Russia and China vetoed this resolution. A resolution that, as I've said, was strong and it was balanced. That was the product of consultations with members of this council. We did listen to all of you. We incorporated feedback and we worked to forge consensus around a resolution that would send a clear message to the world. And most importantly, to Israelis and Palestinians, that this council is determined to meet this moment. Colleagues, we should not encourage Russia's cynical and irresponsible behavior by voting for its text, which was offered up at the very last minute, as I said earlier, with zero consultation, and which contains a number of problematic sections. Though today's vote was a setback, we must not be deterred. The United States stands by our text, and we stand ready to work with all member states to support the efforts of the Secretary General, President Biden, and Secretary Blinken, in cooperation with many countries around this table and in the region to build a more peaceful and secure future for Israelis and Palestinians alike. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the permanent representative of the United States for their statement, and now I give the floor to the permanent representative of China.
I thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, China voted against the draft resolution which has just been put to vote. This position is based on facts, based on law, and it is based on conscience and based on justice, and also based on the urgent cause of the entire world, in particular the Arab countries. We all recall that last Wednesday, a draft resolution focusing on the humanitarian situation in the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, emphasizing the protection of civilians and supported by an overwhelming majority of council members, failed to be adopted because of a veto. On Saturday evening, the US introduced a new draft text that set aside the consensus of the members and included many elements that were still deeply divisive and that went far beyond the humanitarian realm. Several members, including China, Russia, UAE, and Brazil, proposed amendments to the text. However, the proponent ignored the major concerns of all parties and made only cosmetic changes to the draft. And it was printed in blue in order to push the council to vote on it. In terms of its content, the draft is seriously out of balance and confuses right and wrong. In terms of the approach, the draft was introduced in haste and lacked the consensus it deserved. In terms of its effectiveness, the draft does not reflect the world's strongest calls for a ceasefire and end the fighting, and it does not help to resolve the issue based on the above. The draft text is evidently not in a position to be adopted. Mr. President, China in no way opposes Council taking action. On the contrary, we have always strongly called for the Council to play a responsible role. What we oppose is that the draft resolution is evasive on the most urgent issue of ending the fighting, and that it has never been able to call for an immediate ceasefire in clear and in unambiguous terms. At this moment, ceasefire is not only a diplomatic term, it means the life and death of many civilians. If a resolution from the Security Council is ambiguous on the issue of war and peace, It's irresponsible, and it's also extremely dangerous. It's tantamount to paving the way for large-scale military action and giving the green light to further escalation of the war. China is by no means indifferent to acts that harm civilians. On the contrary, we strongly condemn at the first opportunity all violence and attacks against civilians and called for diplomatic efforts to promote the early release of the hostages. What we oppose is that the draft text does not call on the parties concerned to stop the indiscriminate and asymmetrical use of force, nor does it call for a thorough investigation into the heinous attack on the Al-Ahli hospital. Such selective application of international law and double standards will only push more innocent civilians to the brink of death. China is by no means indifferent to the sufferings of the people in Gaza. On the contrary, we have always strongly called for the opening of relief corridors, ensuring humanitarian access and avoiding a humanitarian disaster. What we oppose is that the draft text selectively avoids referring to the root causes of the current humanitarian crisis in Gaza and fails to urge Israel to lift the full blockade of Gaza and to rescind the evacuation order for northern Gaza. Such an evasive approach will only accelerate Gaza's descent into an even greater humanitarian disaster. China is in no way denying Israel's security concerns. On the contrary, we have always strongly advocated that equal attention should be paid to the security concerns and legitimate rights of both Israel and Palestine. What we oppose is that the draft text attempt to establish a new narrative on the Palestinian-Israeli issue, ignoring the fact that the Palestinian territories have been occupied for a long time and evading the fundamental issue of independent statehood for the Palestinian people. It's worth being vigilant that the draft departs from the spirit of previous UN resolutions and embeds the dangerous logic of confrontation of civilizations and the justification of war and the use of force. If the draft is adopted, it will completely dash the prospect for the realization of the two-state solution and plunge the Palestinian and Israeli peoples into a vicious cycle of hatred and confrontation. Based on the above, China will vote in favor of the draft resolution proposed by the Russian Federation. Mr. President, China has no selfish interest on the question of Palestine. Any initiative that contributes to peace will receive China's staunch support. Any endeavor that facilitates Palestinian-Israeli reconciliation will be pursued by China with all-out efforts. Since the outbreak of the new round of conflict, China has actively advocated that the Council take meaningful action and make binding decisions on the Palestinian-Israeli situation as soon as possible. We also emphasize that the action and decisions of the Council must respect the facts of history, take the right direction, and reflect due responsibilities and accountability so as to ensure that they stand the test of morality and conscience. We're ready to continue to work with the members of the Council and the international community to play a constructive role in putting an end to the fighting, protect civilians, avert further humanitarian catastrophes, and realizing a comprehensive, just, and lasting solution to the question of Palestine. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the permanent representative of China for his statement, and I now give the floor to the permanent representative of Albania.
Thank you, Mr. President. We thank the United States for their work and joint efforts in narrowing as much as possible the differences in order to respond to the urgency of the situation on the ground. We welcome a balanced draft which condemns the terrorist attack of Hamas and calls for the liberation of hostages, expresses sympathy for all innocent victims, reaffirms the right of states to self-defense in compliance with the obligations under international law, calls for the protection of civilians and for humanitarian causes and humanitarian corridors to ensure unhindered humanitarian aid to those in need. It also welcomes the efforts of all regional and international actors to avoid a spillover and reaffirms the commitment for a political solution to the Middle East conflict. Albania deeply regrets the draft resolution was vetoed. Mr. President, we know perfection is the enemy of good. There are times when the urgency of the matter and the complexity of the issue asks for swift action, doing the best possible